It is Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. We're here at Nicholson Library with Joel and Susan Marrant. We're here to talk about their time in Romania and their time at Linfield and in Binville. So Joel and Susan, thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure
to be here. Thank you.
Let's start at the very beginning. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about your childhoods, your hobbies, and how you came to know each other?
Go ahead, Sue.
Well, as a child, I moved around a lot with my family. My dad was in the Air Force, and I was influenced, I think, by my mom and my grandmother as far as handcrafts. So I've always been interested in making things, and I was a Girl Scout and did all the badges, and so that's always been a focus of my life, which, as we discussed, you'll see I'm continuing, and I still do today.
Well, I grew up only about 20 miles from where Susan was growing up, but we met at the University of California at Santa Cruz our freshman year, and we fell in love and were married between our junior and senior years. And my experience was kind of similar. Susan was moving around, though, a lot, and my entire childhood was spent in the same home. I was a surfer kid, a mile from the beach, and so just about every day I went down to the beach in some way or another. And so being a surfer kid and growing up in Venice really prepared me to go into a totalitarian system in a police state, yeah. So learned a lot of my skills there, being a scrubberoonie kid on the streets. So, yeah. So I suppose we should mention that Santa Cruz experience, because we were both members of the pioneer class, the first class.
Santa Cruz, first class. Yeah. It was quite an experience. I struggled there, but it kind of planted a lot of seeds. Actually, I failed my first year of Santa Cruz. Somehow or other, there was great individuals there that just said, listen, we've got to work with you and we'll get you out of here. And I graduated on time with honors. It was a big turnaround.
Mm-hmm. You were the inaugural Bananas Club.
We were.
That's very cool. But you both grew up very close to Santa Cruz then?
No, Southern California.
Okay, so tell us about your first trip to Romania, kind of your first impressions when you first, the plane landed and you got to your various towns, and kind of your work expectations versus reality.
You know, I'd say there was a lot that went on before that was really critical before then. And it was after we graduated from Santa Cruz, it's like, where are we going to go? And Joel got a great grant.
Yeah, I got a great grant to go to the University of Oregon. I decided halfway through my Santa Cruz experience to switch from English literature to anthropology. So we both got degrees in anthropology, and I got this wonderful 5-year program at Oregon, which gave me basically the opportunity to go anywhere I wanted to do my dissertation research. So it was like everything's just flying fine. However, we graduated from Santa Cruz in '69, which was the height of the Vietnam War, and I was trying to deal with the draft. That's one of the reasons why we got married, but that didn't keep. Anyway, long kind of struggle with dealing with the political situation in the United States. I was one of the active graduate students in our department in the anti-war movement. So I feel like looking back, and I know this from research I've done, that I had early on as a 20-year-old, I had a folder in the U.S. government archive, or whatever the surveillance is, that listed me as one of those. Yeah. So anyway, that's what was part of the baggage we carried to Romania. We went to Romania because my initial plan to go to Polynesia and to surf in Bora Bora.
And being making baskets.
Yeah, so it was spoiled.
It got turned right on its head, didn't it?
So it got spoiled by the French testing their atomic bombs there, which I couldn't, just couldn't do. So we ended up in Romania because bonus upon bonus, the U.S. government through the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, NIH were offering these wonderful grants to go to these East European countries that were just opening up, and Romania was one of them.
And the added bonus about Romania is they speak Romanian, which is a Romance language, and we both had background in French and Spanish.
Yeah, so everything's just kind of set up well for us after I got a deferment for asthma. So it was my first trip to Europe, and I'd been to Mexico with Susan on a ethnographic methods class, which was great. But I went in as a complete naive.
I was totally naive. Totally.
What were you expecting?
Oh, whoa.
I didn't know what to expect, really. My father is Slovak, and so I'm half Slovak, and that half gave me a sense of what the East European philosophy of life is based on their historical experience, which is very challenging and oppressive, and they left, my ancestors left, for the same reason Susan's ancestors left, to get away from repressive governments. So I expected that, but when we arrived, it was like, wow, this is really cool. This is going to be a real adventure, and even the guards hanging around the airports with their, assault rifles, it was like, oh, that's kind of like a movie I saw back in, 62 or something like that.
There was no connection to reality. I just figured, oh, we're going to go to, a different place, and, well, things will be different.
And they were.
And they were really different.
Yeah, I went with a group of nine graduate students, most of whom were from Amherst University on the East Coast. One was a Stanford grad. I was the only really Western university graduate student. And it kind of formed a clique, but they were all kind of off by themselves.
Well, they were in Bucharest and Cluj, the two main towns. There were only a couple of them that were out in the country like we were. Is that right?
About half of them were out in the country. Yeah, but it's important, and one of the key things was that I really wanted, based on my long experience, live with rural residents and farming and stuff. I mean, I didn't know which end of a hoe to use.
Nor did I.
So, I wanted to go to the most rural, economically backward, traditional village that existed in Romania, and that's where we went to.
That's where we went.
I don't know, how did you respond to that challenge?
Well, what we saw when we first landed, we were with this group, did a little bit more polishing up on a Romanian language because we'd studied intensively at the UW
2 years.
for 2 years before we left. And so it was like, whoa, we get there and you because you're an American at a high level of education, we got to go to the faculty dinners in Cluj and the embassy, and they'd bring us in from the country and have Thanksgiving with the ambassador, and
I'd fill my pockets with the nuts and candies that they had there because there weren't any anywhere else.
But the reality for us out there in the village was so different. It was, we walked into this village.
About 4 miles, yeah.
That was the way you could get in, unless there was a cart. And after a while, there was a hay cart that came along and said, you want to ride with us? And so we rode the west partway in with them. But I mean, the first thing I saw were these women bare-breasted, and because this was September when we went in, they were working hard. They were breaking hemp. In this region here, where we live, McMinnville, they used to raise linen, and that's very similar to that particular fiber. But I'd never seen anybody like that start to process stuff. It was beautiful. It was like a hippie's dream of going into this.
Yeah, remember, we're from Eugene, so it's like I'm walking down this rural pathway, and this, man, look at all that weed out there. But it turned out to be.
It wasn't the smoking kind, it was hemp. So, it had to be processed. But these houses are glorious. They're just so beautiful. They're all wood, and they have these wooden woven fences, and the peasants are walking around in these, well, we consider them incredibly intensively made costumes. Everything that everyone was making or wearing or using was made by them. All the women made all the clothing, the men made all the homes. There was
no electricity
Yeah.
yet. It came, I think, 2 years later after that first visit, and no running water. All the water was drawn from wells, and so there's no way to purify the water. And we got sick, but our systems got accustomed to it, and we'd return multiple times. And but that first experience, I remember writing in my notes on that first day walking into the village that I feel like I'm literally descending into history. I'm going back to the 18th century. Because as Susan described so lovely there was no semblance of a connection to modern life. No automobiles.
And I remember that first year, this wasn't that first day when we walked in, but several times elder peasants would, we got, how big was that village?
About 1,200 people.
Yeah, so we knew most of everyone, at least by sight or by neighborhoods, and they certainly knew us because we were the foreigners. But I was asked several times, did you fly in a plane to get here? Did you really do that? And is the world really round? I think it's flat. There's no way it could be. And so to hear that the world was flat, and they believed it, there was nothing, I was trained as an anthropologist, so I couldn't do a whole lot of science for them. But they believed it. And that's astounding.
Yeah, so in the space of that was 73. So in the 50 years since, been utterly transformed. I know that's one of your questions, is how has it changed? And aside from the fact that they have fixated on those traditional peasant costumes, and still use a lot of the imagery, like the large wooden gates and some of the utensils, things like that, and music especially, as props really for living in the modern world. It is a modern world. All the kids have, like all around the world, like even in Sierra Leone where I was, they still have the phones and TikTok, which we don't understand or don't even know what it is. So in those 50 years, it's unrecognizable. Susan was back there a couple years ago.
Yeah, maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. You can speak to that.
It was so sweet. We lived with this couple that was, they didn't have children, and normally what they did, most of these older peasant homes when we went in have 2 rooms. The one room where everybody sleeps and prepares food, and the women have looms up certain times of the year in there. And the other room is a very fancy room. Well, this couple would, to get a little extra income, rent it out to usually the school teachers that would come. And they were, I think, forced to take us on in their home.
By the museum director, who was the supervisor for my research in the local city.
So evidently a student had gone through the area just before I went to visit, and Marie was still living. She was the woman that taught me everything I knew. She was my auntie. And she sent Marie still had one of Joel's calling cards, and she said, could you please get a hold of this person, and because I want to see them before I die. So the student got a hold of Joel, and I went. I got to see her again.
And this is your tiny town in Marrants.
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of the town again?
Poyanalize. Poyanalize, it means meadows of mud.
Meadows of the Isa River.
Well,
It used to be
Poyanaglodelouis, which was meadows of mud. Yeah, so the communists came in and changed that name.
Yeah, and that's the one that's something that surprised me. Again, when I was at Santa Cruz, but even more so at Oregon, I was a member of the lefty anti-war movement. I mean, that was the politics that I brought with me to Romania. And so it was a test case for, well, what is communism really like? And within a couple of months, I knew, well, this isn't the communism that I knew. I mean, it's simply a police state with an authoritarian regime that the people were fearful of, and because there were immediate reprisals. Like it didn't really get to me until halfway through that first year that I had 2 agents, security police, tailing me all the time. At least one was always within calling distance of me, and sometimes both of them when we were at social or political activities. And we didn't know for sure until after we got back that what happened to our friends and to the people we spoke with. Anthropologists have informants, and in the old days we used to talk to anybody and didn't think much about asking them to sign a release form or anything like that. So that's been one of the great, it's baggage that I carry, it's a burden, it's being shame to me that unknowingly I allowed many of the best people in Romania who were so courageous, who would speak with us. Many of them just would turn their faces. And we thought they were just being unfriendly to Americans. No, because if they knew that if they spoke with us, they would have to go to the police station and report everything that was said, which in their lives was a huge burden to carry. So, and that's if there's two sides to the coin here, and we've got the happy dancing peasants that we enjoyed, and I mean, they're wonderful, friendly, happy people. And the other side, though, was what they had to deal with in reality that they couldn't show us. And if they did show us, they got punished for it.
Yeah, and I mean, we changed so much just from those experiences. I mean, like you said, we went in so incredibly naive. But the reality, at the end, towards the end of that the first of the last trip that we took, it was, and the screws the government would put on. First, when we first went in, the peasants where we were, it was a non-collectivized little village, which was great because, they were growing everything for themselves, trading within themselves, going to the market, maybe if they needed a little extra, sell a few pigs at the market. That was the first year. Boy, every time after we'd go back again for 6 months or another 10 months, or Joel went a couple times on his own, the screws, you never thought they could get tighter on people, but they would. It was just so incredibly dramatic. It was terrible. Yeah,
and we took, Susan accompanied me on 2 January term trips with students to Romania. The first was in 1982, and the second was, 1980, had to be 91 because the so-called revolution was in 89. So it was 92 and 97. And so this was after the so-called revolution, and things were just starting to appear that you might see in the West, like a restaurant, for example. that didn't just serve,
That had food.
that actually had food, as you experienced, Alyssa, there. And those were hugely important experiences in our lives personally, because on the first one, our daughter went with us, and she was 16. And in the second one, our son went, and he was 18. And so they saw firsthand what they saw as little kids, because the second time we went was in 81, 82. And that's when they were little toddlers and went to school and learned Romanian.
Mm-hmm.
And
They still know it today.
They know a couple phrases. I'm totally convinced my daughter is, because she spoke impeccable Romanian when we left. She would correct us. She was 6 when we left, and our son wasn't speaking English when we left. And
he wasn't speaking English when he came back.
He wasn't speaking English when he came back either. He had this mix of Romanian and daycare stuff, and we were the only English speakers around them where we were. So that was another amazing experience, going as a parent and taking them there. I mean, my son was in diapers, so we, as old as we are, only know cloth diapers, so we took cloth diapers. Well, in the winter, to wash anything, you have to break the ice in the spring, and so here I am trudging down there with those old dirty diapers, breaking the ice, beating them out, and then, boiling them, and that was an amazing experience. What we take for granted is so much. I remember every time coming back from Romania and just getting frozen when I'd go in the grocery store, because one, there would be fruit, or you just stand in front of it and it's like, what? And then you have to choose. It's not like you have one bruised banana that you get for your allotment. You got bananas and cherries and grapes and everything out of season, and blueberries and pineapples. It's crazy what we have here.
Can you speak a little bit more about the differences in child rearing and family life? Your experience between Romania and here.
Okay, what year was it when we took our kids?
81
81.
and 82.
Yeah, 81, 82 we were there. Our son we had 2 places where we'd spend time. In Szigetul Marrant, which is right on the border with the Ukraine. And we stayed in a little room there.
All 4 of you?
All 4 of us. Well, actually, when we first went there, that was the toughest year I think I've ever had in my whole life. They knew we were coming ahead of time. They got us an apartment in this little town, and we were in that apartment for what, 2 or 3 months?
September to January.
Yeah, and then they moved us because they needed to clamp down on foreigners.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what was happening, and international folks. So they moved us out to the river, which was...
So they were worried that there were too many foreigners in Szigetul?
No, well, we were the only ones.
But this was a society-wide crackdown.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there was starting to be resistance to Ceausescu's horrendous oppression regime.
Yeah. So we get out there, and lo and behold, we're the only people in the hotel. The hotel it was their luxury hotel, put under construction, and it had hot water maybe, I don't know, a couple times a month.
Yeah, I mean it was.
And what we had was 1 room and a bathroom.
I felt like Jack Nicholson kind of in The Shining, because I'd be, after a long day, and I've got some anecdotes about that. Long day out in the snow, I'd come in, and at night on an old hand, typewriter, trying to type my notes, and poor Susan's in there trying to keep the kids amused, with a room with no heat.
With no resources.
And no resources. Yeah, we had I think we found a little 1 burner that we sometimes had electricity for. And the only benefit about being out there was that it was in a park and the river froze over, so we could go ice skating, which we made that into a big deal. So there was that experience.
How did that compare with what you saw Romanian women doing in their own lives?
It was so much similar. Romanian women, especially urban women, it was grim. I would have to get up at 4 in the morning because we would spend like 2 weeks in Siget and then 2 weeks out, 2 or 3 out in the village. So when I'd get up like 3 or 4 in the morning because somebody had told me that there's maybe a chance there's going to be eggs or chickens in the market. And so I'd get my packages of cigarettes and I'd go and stand in line. And sometimes nothing would come.
Explain the cigarettes.
We had a clear division of labor, and one was he couldn't dabble in the black market. So in order to get, that was we did it that way intentionally so that if I was caught, well, I'm just a little woman, I don't know what I'm doing.
She was so good at playing dumb. No offense, Susan.
No.
But you were a master.
I learned playing dumb. I learned tears can take you sometimes if it's used in the appropriate place. You can get what you need to get. And in the village, though, at that point, when things seemed so tough, in the village, I didn't get the sense that they were as tough, but it was, I know fiscally for the villagers, it was really hard because they just didn't have money. And they were taxed. They were forced to raise more pigs or more sheep or give all their wool away.
Yeah, in the collectivized villages, but not in Poyen.
And not in Poyen. But still, it was never as hard as it was in those big concrete places.
Blocks.
Yeah, blocks.
Yeah, so as a male, I wasn't just a male, I was an American foreign male who was perceived suspiciously by pretty much everybody. And because frequently I'd be asked by someone who became a friend if I was really a spy. And there was a book written fairly recently by an anthropologist named Catherine Verdery that you've looked at perhaps, or maybe you read part of it, which is a really interesting first-hand account of what it was like to be in such a situation where you were considered to be a spy. Even though she declares throughout that she wasn't, there was always a suspicion that we carried around. And I always felt as if I was kind of on the outside. For one thing, I was the only member of that cohort of graduate students who was married. And it was unthinkable to bring kids into the country, but we did it without, oh yeah, they need to see this too. And so we did that, but I felt kind of excluded from that group because I didn't buy it, I didn't buy anything anybody was selling. I didn't buy what the Ceausescu regime was saying about how the culture's flourishing and the people are extremely happy. And ironically, it was the people in their kitchens, when they felt as if no one else was listening, they would talk about the golden age, the Época de Aur, which has just happened again today, a couple days ago at the inauguration. The notion of there being the golden age is reappearing. So, you can carry that as far as one would like, given their political feelings. But, I didn't, and so I didn't also buy what the Americans were doing. Because when I was at Eugene, I was kind of a member of a group that was suspecting the CIA involvement in what was going on in Polynesia, the foreign infiltration of Native and Indigenous people's lives, to gather information that then would be turned over to the military. And that was horrendous. So I felt guilty for that too, because I continued on, I had this career, and I piggybacked onto the grants that I was privileged to receive. Other grants, because I got 4 Fulbrights. Did I deserve them? I don't know. I survived the time in Romania. Is that enough, to get that reward? But I never, and even today I'm working on a project with a Linfield colleague, Mike Roberts, on another issue in East Asia that has to do with involvement of American institutions, granting foundations that support activities that Americans don't know about, that are subversive to the indigenous population. So I just wanted to share with people who would be seeing this, all 4 of them, that it's not just reporting on field work that was so exciting and fun, because it was in some respects, but you go down, you break the surface there, and you fall a long, long way into a big cavern in which there's a lot of darkness. And fortunately, Susan, by her temperament and by the direction that she went with her art and her crafts, to avoid a lot of it. So I'm thankful for that.
Will you tell me a little bit about the arts and crafts? Because we have such a wonderful selection of the embroidery patterns in the collection. Can you speak a little bit about your experience with that?
Well, I think primarily the most exciting thing for me was a lot of these women were, and men too, I think, in the village, were totally illiterate. They didn't need to read, but they did need to have skills. And so every woman was an embroiderer, every woman was a weaver, every woman took care of kids, every woman was able to shear her own sheep and kill her own chickens, and every man was able to ride a horse and stack up the hay in just the most beautiful haystacks. And they all worked out in the fields. So they did all this back-breaking labor, but you could see them, and it was so beautiful, just the way they were so slow-paced. And it was just, they kept at things. I'm okay. They kept at things. And when they were teaching me embroidery or jewelry, well, beading, they had a lot of beadwork and beaded necklaces, they would ask, what do you want to learn? What is it that you want to learn? So I say, well, I'd like to learn how to make a cross stitch or something like that. Well, what kind of cross stitch do you want? And go find the cross stitch that you want and bring it to me. So I was learning just by sitting next to someone, and it was amazing.
Yeah, and Susan was remarkable. I was under suspicion, and I'm kind of a suspicious guy anyway. But Susan was so beloved there. In fact, the common story about us was, before we had kids at least, was that Susan was actually a German-American princess.
I was princess.
Because there was a very strong...
Also a princess, not the kind of princesses that are around now.
Yeah, and that I was like a lackey, that I was chosen by the Americans to accompany Susan and protect her, which was okay with me. It was a kind of a nice role to play, but so she could go in with impunity to any home and be welcomed, and what she gathered from the women of the village who trusted her implicitly was really so helpful to me as I tried to write about the village and what their lives were like and what their inner experience was. Because I think it's clear people would not feel as welcome sharing that information with me, because who knows where it was going. And rightly so, because I would never accuse any of my colleagues, or myself of kind of conspiring to provide information to any party that would hurt people. But I know we did, and I'm just speaking for myself. So, yeah, Susan was a celebrity. Still is.
Yeah, it was just amazing to learn all those things. And to also learn that some women are better, well, in our village, actually where we live, 2 doors down, were the women that were selected by the Ceausescu family to embroider their traditional peasant outfit for them. So they were amazing women with a needle. Other women were amazing weavers. But everybody did it. Now, today here, that doesn't happen here. It doesn't even happen in Romania anymore. So, unfortunately, all those traditional skills, when you have the time, it takes a lot of time to make things like that.
Yeah, there's an interesting kind of parallel connection between teaching at Linfield and being in Romania. Because I came back to Linfield only after a couple years teaching here to become, have another 25 years of teaching. And 2 of the classes that I taught at least every other year, sometimes every year, was a course on Eastern Europe, peoples and cultures of Eastern Europe. And the other course was folklore and mythology. And so just as in 1970s and early 80s, we were studying a traditional culture, I was coming back and teaching that traditional culture to generations of Linfield students whose traditional cultures were dissipating parallel to the Romanian kids. So in 1980, for example, I'd come back after being in Romania and writing about the children's games that they would play there. I would collect information on what folklore games were being played by the kids here. By the time I retired in 2007, kids weren't playing any games anymore. Because of this and other reasons too. So it was like, oh my, I've seen the demise not just of European peasant culture, traditional, but also of here in the United States, and which is a bit eerie and sad. Because I think that's a very extremely important part of every culture, is the oral tradition that's carried on. Like Susan, I think her experience of learning firsthand from peasant women how to embroider and how to weave, my God. I don't know if you can do that in very many places anymore, no. in Europe at least.
Well, let's see. You just mentioned coming to Linfield, because let's talk about coming to Linfield. What were your first impressions of the university, and then of McMinnville, and then what was it like to live here?
I looked at Joel and I said, "Are you kidding me? We were coming from Eugene. We'd done field research and been to Europe and, seen the big wide world, and we're coming to McMinnville?" I said, "Okay."
Wasn't that?
6 months. And then...
Well, it was also at that time in 1978, when I got my first contract, McMinnville was in a bad state economically.
Yeah.
I mean, half the stores downtown were boarded up. There was just Thrifties where you can go to and have coffee. There was the Blue Moon, of course, that was there. And if you wanted 2 steaks for $9, you had them. There was one donut shop. Shop that I walked into, saying, because I love donuts. Plenty of donuts down in Eugene. But next, right in the table right next to me were a bunch of old guys, and they were sitting around telling racist jokes. And I thought, wow, nobody's being offended by this at all. So it was a different culture shock.
Totally, really rural, but a different rural.
Yeah, and not to, rural cultures are fine. I mean, in their own way, the Romanian peasants would have been just as racist and narrow-minded, but that was the Linfield that was there. I had only one other teaching offer, and that was to the University of Southern Florida, which I thought, okay, Linfield doesn't work out because it was just a half-year contract to begin with. Then I'll just go there and serve. You know, if I can't go to Polynesia, and Linfield wouldn't take me, so anyway. Yeah, it was a big shock. And I've got to add one anecdote because it made coming to Linfield harder in some ways than going to Romania, because we knew we could get out of Romania on our own accord. But I was teaching a course called Human Behavior with a psychology professor. And my job was to teach about the past of human behavior and its present and ethnography and all of that stuff. And so I'd given my first lecture on evolution in the spring of 1979.
And he's at Linfield.
And I'm living over in the Dana apartments where married faculty with kids could stay for a while. And so I walked downstairs and went to my old Plymouth, 1967 Plymouth. Great car. And went down, started up, and and I thought, oh God, it's bad again. So lifted up the hood, didn't see anyone back, started again, and smoke started coming out of underneath the hood. And it's like, what is going on? And then I noticed that in the back of the, under the hood, in the back behind the engine block, was a empty bag of sugar, 5 pounds of sugar that had been dumped into the crane case. And then attached to that bag was a note saying, basically, we don't need any of your kind coming around here, you know, you revenuer, evolutionist. And at that moment I said, nope, we got to go. So I went back up and asked Susan. But Susan was 6 months pregnant with our son.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as if, okay,
We're leaving today.
we'll just take that job in South Florida. No. So stuck it out, told the president, who was embarrassed by it, and did kind of a snake oil dance the next day with my students. You know, coming around to the point of broadening minds. And I'm so glad I'm here at Linfield, because there's so many open minds just waiting to be filled with knowledge and wisdom. You know, I may have laid it on really thick. So anyway, so that was Linfield back in 1978. And it changed so much, and it became what Linfield will always be to me, and that was a family college. Not in any pejorative way, but a college where faculty and students and administrators could get together and be a community and share things. And it was, to my deep despair, that changed. So by the time I retired in 2007, a lot of that family atmosphere had changed, and it's like, well, it can be changed back again, but when you do, there's irreparable damage that can be done to, like, curriculum. So, for example, this is the College of the Liberal Arts. Well, I lost basically my colleague in anthropology. And there was, Leslie, an archaeologist, is there and doing great work. But there's no longer a liberal arts school here, because that's when people get together and talk about things other than how much money they're going to make, So that's just the hard, cold truth. And all of that has really happened, I think, without your seeing it directly, at least.
Right. But but I was on the other side, and I for several years worked at the public library. And I came to love, it wasn't too fast. I mean, it wasn't too slow. Pretty quickly, things turned around for us because we got involved with, initially with a great faculty group here. That was really great. But then I became really involved and dragged Joel along into McMinnville. And McMinnville grew and changed, and it's been a great place to raise a family And both our kids, when they graduated high school, said, we're leaving this town and never. Well, they both came back. Took them 10 years. They came back. And, they're in the area. Now, if you want me to comment on McMinnville itself, it's at, I think, a real turning point right now. And I think people need to be aware of what's going on. It's come out of a really good transition.
Yeah, I would just say, add to that it's a microcosm of a much larger macrocosm involving the entire country, and actually involving the entire globe.
Yeah.
With technology has come, as everybody knows, a lot of forced changes, not changes that were decided upon, where people were agents, but rather they were acted upon. But I'm an optimist, a cosmic optimist, in that I know that those are changes that were made by human beings who perhaps have institutional loyalties, but they can change their minds. So I think it's certainly in the realm of possibility for that sense of family to come back, but there have to be structural changes that allow that to happen. More opportunities for faculty to be really, first of all, open. And if there's a problem, it comes out and you talk about it. And not something that's decided upon behind closed doors. And that's what I see. Maybe it's just the suspicion of an anthropologist who's in his 78th year, but there it is.
Talking about being open to things, you also did a number of terms abroad in Palestine.
Yeah, I went to Palestine and did an archaeological dig, and that was great, with the president of Linfield going, and that was great, even though at that time it was Israel, the Israeli state was showing signs of, in response to pressure, antagonism, to respond. There were also machine guns when I arrived at Tel Aviv airport. And in 1991, when I went there volunteered as a member of a peace group to go there, to bring together Muslims and Christians and Jews to talk about how to bring peace to that embattled state. Our group was held up at the airport, and we were interrogated and confined to basically quarantine for a couple days, and then flown back to London. Never understanding why that happened. But, that's added, Alyssa, to these other events that make me very wary of what governments do. And it's like, well, so every place I've gone, including Sierra Leone, where I taught for 2 years, it was like, well, wake up, what's really going on here? Feel free to ask questions. And, as a privileged white guy in a privileged field of anthropology, it's easy for me to say, but I had nothing at stake. So my heroes in life always will be those people who, under pressure, in places where they could be punished for just speaking out, they still do that. It's extraordinary, and it doesn't make any difference where they're from. I guess, is that an answer to anything?
Yeah,
question? Okay. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm kind of coming to the end here. As someone who's spent a good amount of time in politically charged countries, what are your thoughts about the direction of the United States generally? I'm also very curious about what you think about the role of TikTok in our national discourse. I know you don't understand it, but just the conversation about repressing it and unrepressing it and banning it and free speech.
Yeah. Do you want to go first with TikTok, or do you want me to talk? Okay.
You take on TikTok.
Okay, yeah. Like many others, I'm just very, very concerned about the future of our country. And it's not specifically a party, it's not a specific person. It's like the tenor of the country has changed, so that now there's fear is a continuing element to people's lives, being together, talking with each other. And not that growing up in 50s LA was free of such feelings, but now it's palpable. And I'm moving to a new place, and just walking around, looking at other homes there, people would come out and say, "Can I help you? Can I help you?" And it's like, that was unthinkable in 1958 Venice, California. You know, it's like, hey, what's happening? You know, and
The automatic suspicion.
the automatic suspicion before you even do anything. It's like, okay, this old guy is going to present a problem to you. But that's the tenor now, and it's that fear that is present. It was present in Israel. It was present in Sierra Leone. It was present in Romania, and I guess the line that I would really want to say strongest is that Americans need to wake up to the reality that lies before them. Because we mentioned the Epoca de Oro, the golden age. When a leader professes that, thinking that these changes that are going to be restrictive will help them, you know, I'd say, okay, read a history book about, you know, anywhere in the United States, whether it's South America or Eastern Europe. You see what's coming. Romanians who lived there and had to escape by swimming across the Danube, you know, they know what it's like, just as Ukrainians do, and many other peoples in the United States, in Europe and elsewhere. So it's like, yeah, it's there. We just have to be members of a community first. We have to give as well as receive, be compassionate, basically be real Christians, you know, if I may say that.
Yeah, you can. And we've got educators in our family. Our kids are all in education, and what I'm seeing, well, everyone's talking about it anyway, but I see, first of all, families really need to step up to the plate in these individual little units, because we've got the nuclear family and then the greater family by extension. They need to take back parenting. So this is not maybe what you were asking about, but they need to take back the role of parenting so that when kids, and socialization, so that when kids start going to school, they know how to respond and they know how to act in a larger group, which is their community. They need to get rid of the dependency. We've got to break this addiction to cell phone use. And that leads to isolationism. It leads to all this screen time where a lot of kids are really, bullying is still going on in a big way, and they just get into their own little corners and have no resources to step out of. So I think as a society we need to pay more attention to these kinds of things. That's not just McMinnville, but all over.
And that leads us to TikTok, which is part of it. We don't need to, maybe you can take 2 hours later on and explain to us what's going on there, but
Okay.
it distracts people from real lives.
Yeah.
And little segments of just instant stuff. 20 seconds, 2 minutes. That's all I understand about it. I don't go there.
Well, those are all the questions I had for you. Is there anything that I missed or anything that you wish I had asked that you'd like to record for posterity?
I would tell people to travel if they can. Learn the language or try to learn at least a few words. When you're speaking to foreigners, don't speak louder and slower in English.
You can see what she was like. Impossible. You know, and I would just add that I also took 3 groups of students January term to Ireland too. And since that was a place where we could speak mostly English, it was much easier for the students. The 2 groups to Romania, I mean, they were in a different world. But the Irish students reaffirmed my belief that first-hand experience is absolutely the only way to educate and to be educated. So the reliance upon devices to learn, as much as that expedites information coming in, it's not the way you learn. And we have to free up those ways of faculty who are responsible, and they all are ultimately, to do what they do best, and that is to engage students and open their minds, and students will flourish. And that's been, as my paean to Linfield, that's the greatest gift that's been given to me, is my relationships with my students, which are still intact. I think most of them are okay with me, you know. So, yeah. So thank you, Linfield. Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you both for being here with me today. I appreciate your candor and your willingness to sit down and talk about ancient history and
Our ancient history.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you so much.